The shopkeeper snatched the dented milk tin from Caleb Mercer's hand. Not gently, not even pretending. He grabbed it the way a man takes back something he considers rightfully his. Fast, careless, contemptuous, and slammed it on the counter so hard the sound cracked through the shop like a whip. "You think credit grows on trees, son?" Harold Fitch leaned across the counter. His face was so close Caleb could smell the pipe tobacco and yesterday's cheap wine on his breath. "You bring back every last copper, or I tell the guards they'll pull that baby right out of your worthless arms and give him to someone who can actually feed him." The entire shop went silent. Every person in that room heard those words, and every single one of them looked away. Before we go on, if stories like this move you, if they remind you that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary courage, subscribe to Orc Girl Tales right now. Hit that like button and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels, because what happens next in that shop, the decision one woman makes in the next 60 seconds, is going to stay with you for a long time. Now let's go back to that shop, to where Caleb Mercer is standing with his 7-month-old son pressed against his chest. And let's watch what happens when the wrong person finally sees the right thing. The morning Caleb Mercer walked into that shop, he had exactly 4 coppers in his left coat pocket, and somewhere behind his ribs, a prayer he no longer believed in. It was that kind of autumn morning, the kind that doesn't ease into border towns gradually. Cold arrives overnight, settles without apology, seeps into the muddy streets, the wooden storefronts, the gaps beneath every door, and announces itself the way a creditor does, without warmth, without patience, without the slightest interest in your terms. Border town. The human-orc war had ended 8 years ago, but the tension had never fully resolved. Orc traders moved through the town. Green-skinned faces appeared among the caravan workers, but acceptance would have been too generous a word. Tolerance was closer. People saw the orcs in shops, on streets, in the market square, and mostly looked through them. The orcs saw the people and did the same, a kind of mutual blindness agreement. During the war, the border outpost had been the town's economic spine. Guards spending their wages here, raising families here. When the war ended, the outpost closed. The guards left, and the town was still searching for its balance. Caleb had woken before dawn. Noah was screaming in his crib, face crimson, furious tiny fists beating the air, blanket soaked. Caleb had been stuffing his own spare shirt between the blanket layers to hold heat overnight. The milk had run out 2 days ago. The coal 4 days before that. What he had left, a dented milk tin he'd bought on credit, 3 weeks prior and still hadn't fully paid for. Half an armload of firewood, promised in exchange for 2 days of fence work, but never delivered. And a 7-month-old boy who hadn't done a single thing in his short life to deserve any of it. He pressed Noah tighter against his chest and pushed through the shop door. The bell above the register chimed, an almost insulting kind of cheerfulness. He nodded to 2 men by the door, caravan workers judging by their boots and their silence, and walked toward the back counter. Harold Fitch was behind a wall of shelves, making notes in a leather-bound ledger, the focused expression of a man who took money very personally. "Mr. Fitch." Fitch didn't look up. "Mercer, I need to talk about my account. I know I'm behind." "I know you're behind." Another note, slow and deliberate. The way they do it when they want you to understand your time isn't worth their ink. "Since the outpost closed, I've been looking for work. Had 3 interviews this week. 2 of them said maybe doesn't pay your account, son." Fitch finally set his pen down and looked at Caleb, the flat expression of a man who'd long since stopped seeing the person in front of him. Caleb shifted Noah to his other arm. The baby's head settled against his shoulder. Small, warm weight, the only good thing in the room. "I'm not asking you to forgive it. I'm asking for 2 more weeks. That's all. 2 weeks and 2 weeks." Fitch said it like a joke. He came around the counter, walked to the shelf where the milk tin stood, looked at the same row of tins with professional disdain, turned, crossed his arms. "That tin I sold you? You still have it?" "Yes, sir." "Bring it back." Caleb hesitated. It's half gone, Noah. I don't care. Bring back what's left, we'll settle the difference. He opened his arms and held one hand out flat, palm up, the way a schoolteacher waits for homework. Or don't bring it. But if you don't, I'm adding your entire balance to the guard's collection list by weekend. Your choice. Caleb looked at that hand, looked at it for a long moment, and then, because he had no better option, and because of a promise he'd made to himself a year ago, the night his wife Clara held his hand while the last candle burned down in her hospital bed, that his son would never see him beg, he reached into his pocket, pulled out the dented milk tin, and placed it in Harold Fitch's open palm. That's when Fitch snatched. He didn't take it. He snatched it, pulled it from Caleb's hand, with the manner of reclaiming something from someone who should never have had it, and slammed it on the counter so hard Noah startled awake and let out a sharp cry. The two caravan workers by the door flinched at the sound. You think credit grows on trees, son? Caleb didn't answer. He was focused on Noah, pressing his hand against the back of the baby's head, drawing small circles, the way Clara used to. It's okay, the motion said. I'm here. Everything's fine. Neither of them fully believed it. You bring back every last copper. Fitch's voice had risen loud enough for the entire shop to hear. There were 8 or 9 people in the room, 2 women in fine cloth coats near the dry goods, a young clerk stocking shelves, an old man reading a gazette by the window, an orc laborer standing quietly in the corner, eyes down, wrapped in the invisibility his presence in town required. And near the back wall, very still in her dark cloak and green skin, watching with an unreadable expression, a woman, an orc woman. Or, I tell the guards, they'll pull that baby right out of your worthless arms and give him to someone who can actually feed him. The silence after that sentence was the worst kind, not shock silence. The silence of people who had decided this wasn't their problem. The 2 women returned to their shopping. The clerk began arranging something on a lower shelf. The old man turned a page. The orc laborer in the corner shrank further into himself. The don't draw attention rule weighed heavier on orcs in this town. Caleb felt his face burn. This surprised him because he'd thought he was past the shame stage. 11 months since Clara's death, he'd been humiliated by circumstances he hadn't chosen. He'd believed a kind of scar tissue had formed over the part of him that could still be wounded in public. Apparently not. I'm not asking for charity, he said. His voice came out quieter than he wanted. I'm asking for time. Time is money. Mercer, and you've got neither. His name is Noah. He couldn't stop himself. Because for the last 2 minutes, Fitch had been referring to his son like a line item in a ledger. Not a human being with a name. A birthday. A boy who shrieked with genuine joy when Caleb lifted him to the window to watch the horses. His name is Noah. He's 7 months old. His mother is dead. And I'm not asking you to carry me forever. I'm asking for 2 weeks. Fitch looked at him, counted on his fingers. Theatrical. Caravan repairman, shepherd, teacher. 2 minors. None of them kept their word. He put the milk tin behind the counter, slid the debt paper forward. Your total balance, weekend, Mercer. Good morning. Caleb stood in front of the counter a few more seconds, not because he had nothing left to say. He was testing whether his legs would cooperate. Public humiliation had a way of leaving a man's muscles uncertain about basic functions. Noah made a small sound against his shoulder. Hungry, cold, patient, which is to say, not at all, just not yet old enough to understand that waiting is optional. He turned, took 3 steps toward the door. The voice came from behind him, not from Fitch, not from any of the watchers, from the orc woman near the back wall, the one who hadn't moved once since he'd walked in. Mr. Fitch. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. She had the quiet of someone who had never in her life needed to raise her voice, because the world had always gone silent when she spoke. Fitch turned from his ledger with mild annoyance. The woman walked to the counter. She moved without hurry, and even that was a statement in itself. She set her small leather purse on the wood, opened it, and pressed several folded silver coins flat against the counter with a single finger. This gentleman's account, she said. All of it. The shop fell silent again, but a different silence. Because an orc woman, green-skinned, small, tusks faintly visible, dark cloak falling from her shoulders, was paying a human man's debt. Not shock, scandal silence. Fitch looked at the coins, looked at the woman. Behind his eyes, a quick calculation was happening that had nothing to do with money. Rûkha Ashgûr's grazing empire accounted for nearly half this town's trade volume. "Ma'am, that's very. And I'll take 2 tins of that formula." She pointed to the shelf where the milk was stocked. "Please wrap them." She turned and for the first time looked directly at Caleb. Not at Noah, at Caleb. "Would 2 be enough, or would you prefer 3? Caleb opened his mouth, closed it. In 33 years he had received compliments, criticism, the crushing kind of mercy from well-meaning people who said the wrong things at his wife's funeral. But never once in his life had a stranger asked him, in a tone that implied the answer actually mattered, whether 2 or 3 would be sufficient. And it was an orc woman asking. 8 years after a war where both races were still counting each other's wounds, an orc woman was asking a human father, "What do you need?" That question alone was tearing down a wall. 2, he said. "Ma'am, 2, more than enough. But I don't accept charity. I'm not offering any." She turned to Fitch. "I'm offering work, if he'll take it." A brief pause. "Mr. Fitch, will he be wrapping those tins sometime today?" Teaching is a good one, but taking the news shift from the first fist without a dialogue. Privileging is still the best rescue ever seen. He smiled. "Mr. Fitch, will he be wrapping those tins sometime today?" Fitch began wrapping. The 2 women in fine coats were openly staring. The old man had lowered his gazette. The clerk had stopped pretending productivity. Whispers. Orc woman hiring a human man. In this world, it wasn't just a wealthy woman hiring a poor man. It was an orc becoming patron to a human, not a class crossing, a race crossing. Caleb looked at Noah. The baby was watching this strange woman with wide, unfocused curiosity. And Caleb felt something in his chest he hadn't felt in nearly a year. Not quite hope. He was too exhausted for hope. What he felt was smaller and harder to name. The closest word was attention. Someone was paying attention, not pity's attention, not the kind that sees the sad story first, the kind that sees something. What kind of work? Honest work and honest pay. "I have a property on the ridge. Been sitting empty 3 years. The cabin needs rebuilding. Fences are down. The orchard hasn't been tended in too long." She paused. "There's a small structure attached to the cabin. Old laundry house. Could be made livable quickly. Heated. Private. Which I suspect matters more than wages right now." She wasn't wrong. "Why?" Caleb asked. It came out more directly than he'd planned, but she didn't flinch. "Because I need the work done. And you need work to do. Those 2 facts don't require a more complicated explanation." That's not an answer. Something appeared behind her eyes, the first flicker of what might have been respect. "No," she said, "it isn't." She picked up her bag. "I'll be at the property tomorrow at 8. If you come, bring the child. If you don't, Mr. Fitch's generosity will have to suffice." She walked out. The bell chimed, indifferent, the same sound for everyone. The old man with the gazette. "That's Rûkha Ashgûr. Owns the border grazing lands. Lost her husband in the war. Keeps the whole operation running on her own." He paused a moment. "Even though she's..." half a sentence. But it told you everything about how the region worked. Caleb stepped into the cold morning. Noah made a sound against his neck. Not crying, just the sound of being there. "I know," Caleb said quietly. He stood on the wooden sidewalk, 2 wrapped tins in his arms, baby on his shoulder, thinking about a woman who'd walked out of the shop without looking back, as if she already knew he'd come. She was probably right. He would come. He didn't trust her, didn't trust himself, didn't trust the flat-footed feeling in his chest. But Noah needed a warm place, and Caleb Mercer, for all his pride, was underneath it all, still a man who showed up. He wrapped his coat tighter around his son and started walking behind him. Through the shop's glass window, 8 pairs of eyes watched him until he disappeared at the end of the street. None of them spoke. But the old man, when Caleb was gone from sight, set the Gazette on the counter, took a deep breath, and said to no one in particular, "Well, I'll be." And Harold Fitch said nothing while he tallied numbers in his ledger, because the numbers balanced. And in the end, that was what mattered to Fitch. The rest, the man with the hungry baby, the orc widow who'd paid without being asked, the sharp silence that had settled over the shop, was someone else's business. He turned a page in his ledger. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall. He came at 8. The night before, he'd told himself he was only going to look, see the property, ask a few questions. He'd said this the way a man says things he doesn't quite believe, while feeding a 7-month-old with the last formula heated over the last quarter-pound of coal, while layering every clean garment he owned around the baby. The walk to the ridge took 40 minutes. No horse. He carried Noah in the carrier Clara had sewn from canvas and old curtain fabric. Improvised looking because it was, but it held the baby snug and warm against his chest. 15 centimeters of overnight snow, his left sole separating from the boot since September, the extra layer of burlap he'd wrapped around it doing less than he'd hoped. Cold water coming in through the boot, the kind of problem that turned serious fast. He found the property at the end of a long dirt road lined with old poplar trees that had already dropped their autumn leaves, bare branches reaching overhead like fingers trying to grip something that had already let go. And the cabin was exactly as the woman had described, not a syllable prettier. A visible sag in the eastern side of the roof, 2 windows boarded, porch railing given up. 30 paces uphill, a bigger, better-kept orc house, 2 stories solid, thicker walls, steeper roof pitch, orc symbols carved above the doorframe. Thin smoke from the chimney. It resembled human architecture, but it wasn't heavier, more grounded, something that pressed into the earth more firmly. Caleb was looking at the cabin when the upper house's door opened and Rûkha Ashgûr came down the road. Work clothes, hard leather boots, jacket worn at the elbows. Physically stronger than Caleb, clearly orc muscle structure was denser, shoulders wider. She carried a paper folder under her arm and moved with the practical efficiency of someone who'd walked hard terrain her whole life. "You came," she said, not triumph, noting a fact. "I said I'd think about it. You didn't say anything." She looked at Noah, the baby watching her from the carrier with wide-eyed gravity. "How old?" "7 last week." She nodded, the way you look at something fragile that claims it isn't. Then she turned to the cabin. Worse than it looks from the road. Foundation sound. Had it checked in spring. East side of the roof needs replacing. Maybe 60% of it, but the bones are good timber and haven't rotted. She opened the folder and held out a hand-drawn diagram. Detailed. Someone had spent time on it. Notes partly in Orcish, thick angular characters, as if designed to be carved into wood with a knife. Caleb was seeing orc writing for the first time. The small structure in back, old laundry house, that's the quickest to make livable. New stove, patched walls, glass replacement. Marha says 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. "Did you draw this yourself?" "I draw everything myself. No one else would." He handed the diagram back. "What are the terms of the arrangement? Work comes first. You rebuild the cabin. I cover materials, you supply the labor. Weekly coin, market rate for skilled work. When the cabin's done, you live there rent-free." She paused. "Stay 3 years, meet the terms. Cabin, land, orchard, fences. And I'll sell you the property for 1 silver. Legal deed, in your name." 1 silver? Why? She looked at the poplar trees. "I have more land than I can use, and more money than I need. I've spent enough years watching neither do anything for anyone." She turned back, including me. She paused. Both sides lost people in the war. Orcs tended their own wounds. Humans gathered their own. But the ones in between, the people neither side claimed, they vanished. I've watched enough of that. Caleb wanted to push this, but Noah made a definitive sound against his chest. The pre-cry escalation. "Marha," Rûkha said, and turned toward the house. A woman appeared at the door almost instantly. Marha, old orc woman, 50s, broad-shouldered, white hair pulled back in a practical knot. Her face had been aged less by time than by decades of outdoor work into something resembling stone. She came down the path with a directness that matched Rûkha's, looked at Noah with the assessing eye of a woman who'd pulled 4 children through infancy, and said, "Hungry? Yes, ma'am. Hand him over. There's warmed formula inside." She held out both hands. Caleb paused. 1 second, long enough to establish he wasn't a man who handed his son to strangers without thinking. Then he placed Noah into Marha's arms. The old orc woman held the baby with the automatic competence of long practice. Noah looked at the green face. Marha looked at him. 4 seconds of private negotiation. Then the baby's fist grabbed the woman's coat. Acceptance. A human baby in green hands. Like the most natural thing in the world. "Bottles are inside. Come in when you're ready. There's coffee." She was gone. Caleb noticed Rûkha watching him with an expression that was nearly amusement. She's always like that. Gets along with everyone. Slightly annoying. She almost smiled. Caught herself. They walked the property together for an hour. Collapsed fences, untended orchard, root cellar. Rûkha knew every corner but explained things with orc knowledge. This route goes 3 spans deeper underground. Orc farming knows that, but human farmers usually miss it. She knew the soil composition, which trees were still productive, which ones couldn't be saved. She'd spent time here not just as an owner, but as someone who looked at land closely. "You've been planning this for a while. I've been thinking. Thinking and planning aren't the same thing. What changed?" She looked at him briefly. "I'm not sure yet." Not a full answer, but an honest one. He let it go, and they went back inside for coffee. The coffee was strong, hot, and served without ceremony in plain ceramic cups. Caleb drank, standing, sitting felt presumptuous, until Marha looked at him from across the kitchen and said, "Sit down. I'm tired of watching you stand there, being polite." He sat. Noah was in a low wooden chair propped with a folded blanket. Marha's improvisation, efficient and immediate, working on a formula bottle with serious concentration. He looked up once when Caleb sat, seemed satisfied with what he found, and went back to the bottle. The first 2 weeks were the toughest kind of hard, the kind that doesn't announce itself as extraordinary, just daily and cold and grinding. Dawn start, working until the light quit, which in late October meant working into darkness at both ends. The laundry structure came first. New stove brought in parts from the town supplier, replastering the walls where wind came through. The north window glass, 3 tries to cut right, 1 crack. By end of the 2nd week, it was heatable and windproof. Caleb moved himself and Noah out of the one-room inn in town and into it. Not exactly comfortable, but theirs. The first night he lay awake listening to the wind, testing the new plaster and the stove ticking as it cooled, and Noah breathing the small, steady breaths of a baby who didn't know the difference between a palace and a patched laundry house. By morning, the room had held its heat. That was enough. Marha collected Noah every morning, returned him every evening, and had made an unspoken decision to feed Caleb too, a decision discussed with no one. By end of the 1st week, he'd stopped arguing because the food was good and arguing was tiring. And the food was different. Marha cooked orc food, unfamiliar flavors, roots, spices. First day, he looked at the dark purple root on his plate. Then he ate it. It was good. "Of course it's good," Marha said, quietly, over meals. Daily cultural crossing began. He saw Rûkha most mornings, checking work, asking questions, sometimes pointing out something he hadn't noticed, not interfering, attending. And the quality of her attention was different from what he was used to. Not supervisory, not suspicious. Present. Looking at the work, looking at him, and sometimes asking questions that revealed she'd been thinking more carefully about what he was doing than he expected. One morning in mid-November, 3 weeks in, she came early. Caleb was repouring the cracked foundation. "You didn't sleep last night. Your light was on past 2. Orc night vision was better than human. From the house up the hill, she could sense Caleb's movements. Noah had a rough night. Teething. Marha can take a night shift. Not necessary. Why? He straightened up. Took longer than it should have because his back had been giving him trouble for a week. Every morning a little worse. Every evening he told himself it would be better tomorrow. Too stubborn to mention it. Too stubborn to slow down. Too stubborn to admit that 33 wasn't 23 and 10 hours of physical labor daily was collecting its tax. Because he's my son. Hard nights are part of having a son. You're very determined to do everything the hard way. I'm determined to do it the right way. Those aren't the same thing. Sometimes they are. Sometimes. Not always. Something shifted between them. Not dramatic, not the kind you could point to. Just a small recalibration. Like two compasses settling on the same north. Rûkha looked away, toward the upper pasture, and said, "The fence iron supplier in town is overcharging. There's someone east who does better quality at 2/3 the price. I can introduce you, if you'd like." "I'd appreciate that." She nodded and walked toward the house. Caleb watched her go. He went back to his work, but something had changed, and he knew it. And he spent the rest of that morning refusing to think about what. The gossip started in December. Small town and an orc widow spending time on a remote property with a broke human widower was not a sight that went unnoticed. And it wasn't just class, it was race. Orc woman took a human man onto her property. Lost his mind in the war, now he's working under an orc woman. Someone used the phrase, orc lover. Class gossip stung. Race gossip burned. The timber merchant made an insinuating comment about his arrangement on the ridge. With a smirk he didn't bother hiding. Caleb loaded his timber in silence. That evening he sat by Noah's crib, processing the controlled anger of a man who knows the right response is silence but finds silence very expensive. Next morning he told Rûkha. She listened without interrupting. "Who?" "Doesn't matter." "Doesn't matter? But I'm curious." "Timber merchant Hollis. I've been buying from Hollis for 11 years, she said it, without particular feeling. "I'll move my orders to Patterson on the north side. Hollis will notice my absence. That kind of man always notices." Caleb looked at her. "You shouldn't have to change your business because of gossip about me." "I'm not changing it because of gossip. I don't do business with a man who talks about my employee that way." She met his eyes. "That's an important distinction for me, even if it isn't for others." The town saw it differently. An orc trader boycotting a human vendor felt like economic warfare. Rûkha didn't care. It was that sentence, not the action, the explanation, that stayed with him. 3 days later, when Varn Drask's carriage appeared on the road to the ridge, he was still thinking about it. Drask was 40-ish, broad-shouldered, with the look of a man who had never once in his life been uncomfortable, without immediately correcting it. Land across 3 districts. 2 unofficial trading houses. He didn't get down from the carriage, stopped by the property line and called to Caleb, who was working on fence posts. "Mercer." Caleb kept working, finished the post, turned, but didn't walk to the carriage. "Mr. Drask, I'll be direct. I've wanted this parcel for a long time. Mrs. Ashgûr has refused to discuss it. Her right. But the situation's gotten complicated. Personal elements muddying the official picture. There are people with influence in this region, people with legal resources, people who take an interest in how widows manage their estates. Are you threatening her? I'm informing you, as a courtesy." Caleb walked 3 steps closer to the carriage, enough to make the driver shift slightly. "Rûkha Ashgûr makes her own decisions. I work for her. That's the whole arrangement. The land matter between you is between you and her, not you and me. You seem like a reasonable man. I'm a working man, and I need to get back to my fence posts." He turned, went back to work. The carriage stayed a minute. He didn't turn to watch it leave. That evening, Rûkha came with 2 cups of orc tea. They sat on the front steps. Cold, dark. Drask came by today. What Drask had said to Rûkha was heavier. Legal implications about estate management. Language about the Ashgûr Grazing Lands stewardship. An insinuation, carefully wrapped in procedural concern, that the arrangement with Caleb created vulnerability in the property's management. He could drag the process out, 8 months, and cost real money, even if the outcome was never in doubt. What do you want to do? Continue exactly as planned, especially when someone pressures me not to. Her voice had stone's hardness, the kind that doesn't crack under pressure. I spent 20 years in this region doing what was expected of me. Not once did I make a decision I was proud of, specifically because someone else told me I should. I'm not going to start now because Victor Drask wants my fence line. Okay. Get some sleep, Mr. Mercer. You've got the south fence section tomorrow. She walked to the house. Caleb sat in the cold, under the stars. He thought about the shop, Fitch's hand, the tins sound, the moment on the sidewalk with 2 wrapped tins, that unprotected second when something in the world had shifted. He'd been trying for 3 weeks to figure out whether that feeling was something he could trust. He was still working on it. Drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see how far this story reaches. The "until recently" sentence came in late November, during the roof repair. Storm, not the big one that was still a month away, but a serious storm. The unrepaired section of the cabin, the part he'd assessed in November and flagged as marginal, collapsed. Caleb was on the roof the second day, trying to secure the tarp, in weather that any sane man would have called unfit for roof work. He heard her calling from below. He looked down. Rûkha was standing under the snow at the roofline, holding one end of the rope he'd thrown down to anchor the tarp, 2 hands gripping it, boots sunk 1/2 meter in the snow, looking up with the expression of someone who had assessed the situation, made a decision, and was not interested in debating whether the decision was advisable. You need to. The tarp is slipping, she said. Tell me when. 20 minutes they worked. Caleb on the roof in heavy snow, Rûkha below holding the rope. With orc strength, she held it far more securely than Caleb could have. The arrangement was clumsy and far from perfect, but the tarp held for now. When he came down the ladder, his hands had stiffened, his back was worse than ever, and there was a tear in his trouser knee where he'd caught it on a nail. They were standing in the narrow space between the ladder and the cabin wall, closer than they'd ever been, both of them wet from the cold and out of breath. Thank you. Rûkha looked at him. Snow in her coat, in her hair. Her cheeks had turned a deeper green from the cold. Eyes nearly black, bright. The tarp needs permanent repair when the weather clears. I know. There's a man in town who does roof work. If you want, I can. I'll do it. You can't do everything. I can do the roof. She looked at him with a complicated expression. Multiple things at once, some of them contradicting each other, none of them easy to name. You, she said finally, are the most stubborn person I've known in 46 years. I've been told. By whom? My wife. The word came out unplanned, the way certain things come out after enough time has passed. She said it was my best and worst quality, depending on the day. Snow was falling between them, quiet and indifferent. She was right, Rûkha said. Her voice had shifted slightly, soft but not gentle, careful with the word in a way that was deliberate. She sounds like a perceptive person. She was the most perceptive person I ever knew. He paused. Until recently. He hadn't planned that either. 2 words. In the snow, by the ladder, on a day that had no business being worked in. Spoken without performance, without the careful calculation of a man trying to make an impression. The way people say things when they're tired and cold, and the distance between what they're thinking and what they're saying collapses. Rûkha looked at him for a long moment. He couldn't read her expression and stopped trying, just stood in the snow and let the sentence be what it was. She turned without answering and walked toward the house. Caleb stood in the snow. He couldn't decide if he'd said the right thing or made a serious mistake. He went inside. Noah was sleeping through all of it, the way babies sleep through complicated things, deeply and without apology. The porch conversation came. One evening, fences repaired, weather cold, coffee's gone cold. There's something I want to ask, Caleb said. The child you lost. I heard about it once in town. I don't know the details, and I don't want them. I just want to understand one thing. Rûkha was motionless, the kind of stillness that isn't stillness, the absence of permission to move yet. What do you want to understand? The house. The big house. It's a good house. Clearly been a good house, but something's been bothering me since October and I couldn't name it until about a month ago. He chose his next words carefully. It's built for more people than live in it. Not just more than you. More than you, Marha, and her husband. The room layout. The proportions. It was built for a family. Long silence. Her name was Azhra, she said. Her voice was flat. She was 4, second year of the war. Not fire, a raid. They came to our village. Grûkha was at the front. I was with Azhra, but she stopped. I wasn't fast enough. She didn't continue right away. Caleb didn't push. Grûkha felt the house after. Big, strong, safe. A house nothing could ever get into again. Something cracked and mended in her voice within the same sentence. I think he thought it would fill the space, or at least make the space useful. It didn't, Caleb said. No, I don't think that's how it works. How do you know? The question wasn't hostile. She genuinely wanted to know. After Clara died, I spent 8 months rearranging the furniture in her room, trying to make the space mean something, kept moving things around. Never found the arrangement that fixed it. He looked at his hands. Eventually, I stopped trying to fix the space and just lived with it crooked. Crooked. It works, but it's crooked. Yes. Long silence. Then Rûkha shifted, the way she did when she'd been in a vulnerable place longer than she was comfortable with. School plans. When construction starts in spring, I'll need a site manager. I can do it. I haven't told you the scope yet. Tell me. She told him. School building, nursery structure, covered well, materials depot, the careful accumulation of years of thought. What pushed you to want to do this? The real reason. Before the war, there was a wise woman in my clan, Rûkha Ashgûr. She taught orc children and human children together. Same room, same lessons. Everyone said she was crazy. She paused. When the war started, her students killed each other. Silence. I won't repeat her mistake, but I won't stop doing what's right either. Good reason. Rûkha stood up. Get some sleep, Caleb. She said his name. First time, just his name without Mr., without the buffer of formality. And she said it with her orc accent, her own pronunciation, the C harder, the B softer. Caleb heard that pronunciation, and his name became something new in someone else's mouth. Neither of them commented. The council announcement came on a Tuesday. Caleb didn't know. That was the part he kept coming back to afterward. Rûkha hadn't told him. The town's Winter Trade Council, main hall, upstairs Rûkha had been attending for 20 years. Caleb wasn't invited. He was pulling rotten boards at the cabin. Marha came after 7. Coat buttons half done, an expression on her face he hadn't seen before. You need to go to town. Rûkha Ashgûr made a public announcement at the council hall. She paused. About you, and the property, and other things. They went by Marha's cart, Noah in a blanket between them. 40 minutes he spent thinking about what the announcement could be. The hall was warm, lamplit, and packed with the region's trading class. Merchants, suppliers, 2 guild officials, the owner of the largest shipping operation west of the mountain pass, assorted spouses and partners arrayed in a loose constellation around the room. At the front, an empty podium on a raised platform. The formal part was over. Caleb could tell from the noise the distinctive mixed sound of a crowd that had moved past structured proceedings. Rûkha was at the center, surrounded by people in various states of reaction. She was talking to Harrison Webb, owner of the region's largest dry goods operation. The man spoke with careful emphasis, the studied tone of someone maintaining his courtesy while conveying deep, personal discomfort. You can't make these unilateral decisions, Rûkha. The community's perception. I've been making unilateral decisions for 20 years, Harrison. You didn't find them objectionable before. This is different. How? Webb didn't answer immediately. which showed the honest answer was something he didn't want to say in front of everyone. Caleb scanned the room, Drask's men at the far wall watching. Drask absent, deliberate. Someone recognized Caleb. The whisper spread like water. Rûkha found him through the crowd, and something changed in her face. The expression of someone who'd done something hard and was watching the person most affected arrive to learn what she'd done. He came through the crowd to her side. People moved, with the social delicacy of people not yet sure which direction to commit. What did you do? I protected the arrangement by putting it on public record. Drask filed a legal inquiry with the district management office last week, estate management grounds. I registered the lease contract with the county registrar yesterday morning. Tonight, I disclosed the terms to the council. She paused. I also announced the school and nursery plans. You could have told me. I could have. I didn't want to give you the chance to talk me out of it. That honesty landed somewhere in his chest. Webb cut in. Your husband's legacy, Rûkha. Gruk has been dead 7 years. His legacy is not something I need to preserve at the expense of my decisions. Her own capital, came a young voice from the back, and in a brief silence that sentence rearranged the room's atmosphere slightly. Okay, Caleb said. Okay what? Okay, fair point. He looked at her. But you should have told me. Something in her face resolved, jawline shifted a fraction. Yes, she said. I should have. First time he was hearing her admit something, and it meant more than anything she could have said if she tried to explain further. In March, 3 men were waiting in the town square. Drask's men, chosen for their size. Drask is patient. Got a number? Head east, back to human lands. Fresh start. Back to human lands, as if his being in orc territory was already wrong. Caleb thought about the fence post, the roof, the morning coffee, Noah pulling himself up on the table edge. Falling, pulling himself up again. No number. Think it over. I have. They let him go. Messengers, not operators. That evening he told Rûkha. He offered you money to leave. He didn't get to a number. I didn't leave room for one. Why? You could have heard it and told me. Because I didn't want to hear the number. There's a version of this where I tell you the number and we both sit here wondering whether I thought about it. I didn't want you to wonder. That's not a practical reason. No, it isn't. Rûkha looked away. Her hands flat on the table, the posture she took when she was working something out. Caleb, I need to tell you something. She waited. When I paid your account at Fitch's shop, she said slowly, I told myself it was a practical decision. The work needed doing. You needed work. The transaction was simple. She paused. I've been telling myself versions of that for 4 months. She looked at her hands, flat on the table, concentrating on holding still. I'm not interested in performing a clarity I don't have. I'm 46 years old, and I stopped being young enough to be reckless a long time ago. But I think I owe you honesty. She took a breath. This stopped being a practical arrangement for me a while ago. I don't know what to do with that, and I don't need you to do anything. I just wanted you to know. Caleb was very still. Rûkha, she looked. I know. I've known for a while. I didn't say anything because you gave me work, shelter, legal protection. I didn't want what I feel to become one more thing you have to manage on top of everything else. Multiple things were happening on her face, not entirely under control. Orc tusks showed, small, pointed, and Caleb found that face beautiful. That's a very considerate reason. I have my moments. The held tension drained from her face. Carried since October, maybe longer. Not tears, nothing dramatic. Just absence. I'm available for, so am I, right now. I don't think that means no. Neither do I. They sat. The lamp burned. Somewhere Marha passed through a hallway, her steps slow and deliberately distant. If this story is touching you, hit that like button. Support Orc Girl Tales. Every like helps these stories reach more people. The storm came on a Saturday. Caleb felt it before it arrived, a change in air pressure early in the morning, a quality to the silence outside that was different from ordinary winter quiet. Denser, loaded. He'd grown up in mountain country and had learned early the warning that serious weather broadcasts before it arrives, the atmosphere tightening like a fist. But Rûkha had felt it before he did. Orc senses were sharper. When he came outside at 6, she was already coming down. "I see it," Caleb said. "So do I." They looked north. The thing on the horizon wasn't a storm in the normal sense. It was a wall, gray-black, horizontal, a mass moving with the deliberateness that real violence possesses. Not fast, not theatrical, just coming, the way something comes when it doesn't need to hurry. He took Noah to the main house. Marha was at the door. "Your husband? In town? Won't make it back in time. Take the stores. Move everything inside that you can carry from outside. I'll handle the animals. 4 hours. The kind of work that reduces everything to essential." He brought the 2 horses and the mule into the reinforced stable, blocked the doors, carried what he could from the outer storage, and Rûkha was beside him, for the first time doing real physical work together. And the difference showed. She carried the heavy loads because with orc strength she could lift twice what Caleb could. Caleb was faster, more agile, moved more easily through tight spaces. First time they were complementing each other. One strength, one speed. Wind built steadily, the way serious wind does, not in sudden bursts, but building every quarter hour worse than the last. By noon, visibility was under 20 meters and falling. Caleb checked the guide ropes, the ones he'd strung in December precisely for this possibility, and looked out one last time. The world was white, horizontal white, no difference left between sky and ground. It came for the cabin, the sound from the east side, not a crack but a long exhale, the sound of something slowly giving under sustained pressure. The old section of the roof, the side he hadn't repaired, had collapsed. They went together. Guide rope, hand over hand, 20 meters through white nothing, Rûkha behind him, one hand locked to his coat. Inside the cabin was half-open sky, but the west side was intact, the stove undamaged, the crib in the west room, and the root cellar hatch on the floor could be opened. Then, from under the wreckage, a sound, thin, high, rhythmic. Caleb froze and listened. Marha's cat, the gray tabby no one had ever named, living on the property since before Caleb arrived, was under a roof beam and 2 wallboards, hind leg broken, alive and making sounds of vigorous displeasure. 40 minutes to extract, beams heavy, space tight, Caleb's numb fingers, a serious handicap. And finally, Rûkha lifting the beam while Caleb pulled the cat free. Orc strength was what made the difference here. She held weight that would have pinned him. One couldn't have done it without the other. Real partnership. Back at the house, by rope, Rûkha carrying the cat inside her coat, Caleb sat on the kitchen bench and couldn't immediately stand. His back had locked. His hands were bad. The fuel that emergencies provide had run out. Rûkha sat beside him, said nothing, just sat there, close, her warmth immediate and real. After the white cold outside, Noah crawled across the kitchen floor, grabbed Caleb's knee and pulled himself up. Looked up with the expression of someone conducting a careful inventory of available people. Caleb put his damaged hand on his son's head. "Hey," Noah made an assessment in his own language. "Yeah, we're good." From inside Rûkha's coat, the cat was making complaint sounds. "I'll need to splint that leg," Marha said. "Can you?" Caleb asked. "Done worse," Marha said, which was probably true. Toward night, 5 of them, Caleb, Rûkha, Marha, Noah, and a splinted cat. They stayed in the kitchen, because it was the warmest room, and there was no practical alternative. And because in serious weather, the social distances that structure ordinary life turned out to be remarkably fragile conveniences. After 10, the wind still going. "The cabin can be repaired," Caleb said. "I know. While I rebuild it, you'll need somewhere to stay. There are rooms here." That's a different arrangement. It's a practical response to a collapsed roof, which is a different situation, she considered. Marha will talk. Marha's been talking since December. She just does it internally, which for her is extraordinary self-restraint. From the hallway, with flawless timing, "I can hear you." Rûkha looked toward the hallway, then back at Caleb. On her face a real smile, short, unguarded, the first full measure smile he'd seen. Orc tusks showed, small, pointed, white, and Caleb found that smile beautiful. He didn't hide the thought. "Stay," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "Okay." Outside, the storm pressed everything it had against the house's walls. And the house held. Noah said something. From spending time with Marha, from hearing those soft orc sounds every day as he grew. One of his first words came out in Orcish, "Ma." Water. When Caleb heard it, his hammer stopped in midair. His son was speaking an orc word, an orc sound coming from a human child's mouth. His first reaction was complicated, something he couldn't name. Then he looked at Marha. The old orc woman was smiling. Caleb smiled too. "Ma," Noah said again, pointing at his cup. And that was that. April. Rûkha's judge dismissed Drask's estate management challenge. Drask withdrew. The cost no longer justified the benefit. He found another property, a farmer with fewer resources and less resolve. Caleb didn't know that farmer, but he thought about it. Thought about the version of himself who could have taken the number on the street in March. He wasn't sure that version didn't exist. He'd been very tired in March, but he hadn't taken the number, because by then the ridge, before legal documents caught up to deed records, was already his in the ways that mattered. Rûkha wanted to transfer the cabin lot into Caleb's name. Better protects the arrangement. "I don't want it to look like you're paying me to stay." "Caleb, you were offered money to leave and you refused to hear the number. You wintered in a half-built cabin. You rebuilt a fence, a roof, a floor, a door, a porch, an entire east wall. In 3 years, you'll have earned every inch of this property at twice market cost in labor." She paused. "I'm not paying you to stay. I'm recognizing that you're already here." And one evening, Caleb trying to sing an orc lullaby to Noah, Rûkha stood in the doorway, listened, words he'd learned from Marha, to be able to talk to his son. The pronunciation was wrong, the melody off, but it was sincere. Rûkha turned away. She was crying. Since Azhra, no one had sung that melody in this house. He moved into the cabin in November. Rebuilt, new roof as a single continuous slope, just as he designed, better than what had been there before, better even than his first build. 11 days he lasted. The cabin wasn't uncomfortable. It was the best it had ever been. Warm, solid, genuinely his. But the big house was 200 paces up the hill. He'd been drinking his morning coffee there since December. Noah had taken his first real steps in Marha's kitchen, and the path between the two had been worn into the earth with the deliberateness of daily use. 11 days was enough to reveal that practical was a definition that had stopped fitting sometime in late spring. One evening in late November, he knocked on the door of the big house, something he hadn't done since October of the previous year. Rûkha opened it. "Turns out I'm not good at being 11 days away from where I actually want to be." She leaned against the door frame. "I know, I was watching from the study. You could have said something. I was waiting for you to work it out yourself." "How long would you have waited?" She considered this with visible seriousness. 2 more weeks was my estimate, but I was prepared to revise. He was standing on the porch step, in front of a house built for more people than it held, but which had held its emptiness for 7 years. "Rûkha, I'm 34 years old. I have a 1.5-year-old son. I have a cabin I designed myself, and I've been in love with you since February, and I don't have a speech. I'm 46. I'm not looking for someone who stays, who shows up when he says he will, and does what he says he'll do, and doesn't manage me." She paused. "And who tells me when the doorframe isn't level?" He almost laughed. It came out shorter than a laugh, more honest. The sound of a man who'd received exactly the right sentence at exactly the right moment, and didn't quite know how to hold it. "I can do that." She stepped back from the door. He walked in. They married in April, in the orchard. Small ceremony. Rûkha hadn't wanted anything big. Caleb hadn't either. Marha and her husband Thomas, the school teacher. Noah, at 19 months, speaking a mix of orc and human words, conducting his own research from Marha's arms. First mixed family, the town watched. Some accepted, some stayed quiet. The school opened in September. It wasn't a big opening. Rûkha had resisted anything that looked like a celebration. 41 children came the first day, orc and human, sitting side by side. First time. Caleb stood at the back of the room, Noah on his hip, and watched the young teacher, a woman who'd spent 2 years teaching for no pay in a church basement, explain to 41 children in proper rows, in a classroom with windows that were actually glass, what the next 9 months would look like. Noah, 14 months old and newly walking, was studying a red-haired child making faces at him from the third row. Rûkha was beside Caleb, her face the most unguarded he'd ever seen it in public.
"Jericho has prepared for my parents, Rav, but he will tell them who stare at him, for taking the tough ride before he goes to Scarlet,
Open, as if all the careful management was gone. She was thinking of Hura Anna. Her students killed each other, but I won't stop doing what's right. Caleb thought about the wise woman 40 years ago in Ohio, who taught 30 children as if their futures were worth investing in, and who had probably died without knowing that one of her students would someday build a room on a mountain ridge for 41 children. And the tin. Rûkha found it in the old shop. Fitch had long since retired. The shop had changed hands 3 times, but the tin was still there. Dented on the left side, label nearly gone, a small circle of rust on the lid from being stored somewhere damp. She brought it home, set it on the kitchen windowsill of the orc house. Small metal object from a human shop, at the intersection of 2 worlds. "I know it's the same one," she said. "The dent is in exactly the right place. I know too." They looked at it a moment. "Worst morning of the last 4 years," Caleb said. "I know. I was there." He picked it up. It weighed almost nothing. "Set it back down. Why did you buy it?" She looked at the window, at the orchard beyond it, in its autumn state. "Because bad mornings are part of the record too, and I don't want to keep only the good parts." The tin stayed on the sill. Noah grew up and learned the story in layers, in 2 languages. When he brought his own son to the old shop, human child, but one who spoke orc, who'd grown up on orc food, who'd fallen asleep to orc lullabies, he stood on the sidewalk and told the story. All of it. The boy was 7, and listened with the gravity of a child who understands that a story told this way in front of a building means something. "She could have just given money," the boy said. "She could have. Why didn't she?" "Because money solves the problem." She was interested in the person. "Is that harder?" "Yes, much harder." "Was it worth it?" Noah looked at the old shop, thought about the tin on the sill, the orchard in April, the path between the cabin and the house, the scars on his father's knuckles, the dry precision in his stepmother's voice when she said, "Level matters." "Yes," he said. "It was worth it." He put his hand on his son's head. Same gesture, without consciously knowing it, his father had used on 100 ordinary mornings. The weight of a parent's hand that says, "I see you. I'm here. We're here." They walked through the town in the afternoon light. Behind them on the ridge, the orchard was doing what it did every year, reliable and undramatic. Trees carrying what they'd carry, soil holding what it held. The path between the cabin and the big house, worn into the earth by 20 years of daily use, was still walked every morning. On either side of it, orc fruit trees and human fruit trees stood side by side, planted separately by Rûkha and Caleb, grown together. Their roots tangled underground. From above, 2 species, different leaves, different bark, different fruit. From below, where the roots had mixed, 1 forest. Subscribe to Orc Girl Tales. Hit that like button, and tell me in the comments, What moment in this story hit you the hardest?